Hi everybody, it's Eric Dorward here again, and we are going to be continuing our build of the Estes Low Boom SST, and we are working on the engine pods. Now this is probably, ironically, going to be one of the more time-consuming parts of this entire build, just to build a decoration. So this one is basically, well, where I left off. We're at a point that is exquisitely time consuming and a little frustrating, but that's okay. It's manageable. What we're going to do is we have these tiny little bits here, and they're going to go into notches like this to provide kind of like a framework structure. Now, some of them are at a fairly shallow angle, like the front ones up here. These ones, if you notice, I'm trying to get it lined up properly, they more or less fit as is without any modifications. So that's fine. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my pencil and I'm going to mark exactly where the edge is. And then I need to take this and I need to cut it with my hobby knife. I'm going to cut it at an angle just past the mark, a little bit past the mark, just in case I was off. There we go. And this is going to get glued in. Before I do that, I'm going to measure the other one as well. Yeah, I didn't cut that terribly cleanly. Let's clean that up a little bit. So a little bit that didn't quite cut cleanly. All right, that ought to be fine. Anyway, then I'm going to measure this side over here as well. And yeah, what I'm not, that's really close. I can cut a little bit of it off, I guess. I'm going to have to trim these up a little bit once they're glued in place. So I thought, yeah, maybe it wasn't worth it, but that's a decent amount. There. Okay. Now, this is the part that is tricky, frustrating, time consuming, whatever you want to say. So these, oops, really should put that away. Don't need to have knife blades out while I'm trying to do something else. So this, we're going to put the tiniest little bead of glue in these cracks. And these cracks hopefully came out of your sheet of balsa intact. See, there's a little tiny little lip on these things, and that is definitely something that could have been damaged in the sanding process or just in the process of cutting it out. All right, now this needs to go in like so, and it's so small, it's definitely hard to work with. Now we want it to be, we want this part right here to be centered in the notch because it has to share the notch with the other one. So that's the one I'm focusing on. That actually looks pretty good, and it's not quite snug in there. Well, it's not quite flush over here, but sanding will take care of that. I also need to then put the other one in, and I need to basically do these both at the same time because I have put glue in the middle notch. There we go. All right. I did actually push this one a little bit in the process, I think. All right, so I'm just going to put my fingers there and hold it for a little bit. The problem is that the wood is so small here that A, it's fragile, so you could easily break it, and B, it's pretty easy to dislodge it before the glue is fully set. All right, so that's decent. Now the other end, the problem with these is that the angle is much steeper, so they won't fit in just if you try to put them in because well, this is a perpendicular. They fit fine going this way, but you can only turn it so far. Like that's about as far before I start feeling resistance. So what I need to do for the ones in the back is I need to trim the notch with the hobby knife. And this is, I mean, you're kind of eyeballing it, first of all, which isn't super fun. And second of all, it is so tiny and delicate. And balsa is fragile. So I'm going to try to point my blade in this back one at the front notch. I'm just going to push down a little bit. And then I'm going to stick the knife in the existing notch, kind of cut across to carve that out. So it's pretty good. Same deal with this one. The outside ones are actually easier, so I'm aiming my knife at the notch, the front notch, pushing down, and I'm going to cut in from the notch to remove what I've carved out. Yeah, that one was harder for some reason. Sometimes the grain of the balsa makes it easier, and sometimes it makes it harder, but that cuts stuff. Now the hard ones are the one that's in the middle because the other pieces of wood get in the way. So I'm going to do my best here. Also, it feels like I might have gotten a little glue on this. I'm not sure how that happened, but at some point in the assembly, it feels like a little bit of glue got in here. Now I want to make these. This one has to have two cuts in it, right? So it has to be able to accept it this direction and this direction. So I have to make it even smaller. I actually decided it wanted to mostly come out of its own accord. And yeah, that's probably pretty good. I don't feel like I need to mess with that anymore. All right. So hopefully that'll be adequate. Now, it is worth pointing out they're the exact same things on the bottom. So yeah, you got to do this twice. And of course, there's the entire other pod. So this is quite time consuming. And these are not cut to size, of course. So you need to get the sizing done yourself, which means you need to do a bunch of trimming. All right. Oh, since this is a brand new stick, I need to cut. You know, it's not exactly a 45-degree angle because this angle isn't 45 degrees, but I'm gonna just make it a 45-degree angle to start. Hopefully that'll be accurate enough. And yeah, I was just eyeballing the 45 degrees there too. So is it really 45 degrees? Nope. No, it is not. All right, so again, same deal here. I'm gonna mark where the edge is, if it's in the right place. These ones are a bit longer. And we will just cut. There's one. By the way, so I just cut here and here. So these two, you know, in theory, ought to go together to make a right angle. Is this a right angle? No, not quite. So that's not as helpful as you might think. And yeah, there we go. The nice thing is, these were snug enough basically as it is. But if you make these cuts really big, if you make them too big, the stick is going to be really free floating in that joint. But if you make them too small, you might be able to get it in. Like this one is a little bit too small. Like it fits, but it's giving a lot of resistance, which is actually a good thing because it kind of holds it in place for me. All right, so let's hope that this is dry because I'm probably going to bump it a little bit with the whole gluing process. So fingers crossed that I don't dislodge it and that the glue is dry enough. Yeah, so this is like the tiniest bit of glue going into these holes. And then in goes, oops, that was the wrong direction. There we go. In goes the stick. So, yes, such fine detail work. That's actually not, well, it might be good enough. If it's not in the right amount, then this one ought to bump it out, bump it to where it ought to be. It's all right, I guess. Okay. That's pretty good. Now, the important thing here is that we need these things to be seated in their grooves snugly. This is going to have to get sanded and cut in some cases. And like That one, that's probably all right. Probably don't need to cut that anymore. But if I had a decent amount of wood hanging out the side, I would actually need to get my hobby knife and cut it again. And then they need to be sitting in the groove fairly snugly, because the next step is this thing is going to go over the top, and I need it to be nice and smooth down the gaps. Okay, so I'm going to put this aside for the time being. There's a top and a bottom, so the top is done, the bottom needs to be done. I've already done the other one. The other one is put together. What I need to do for this one is, first of all, grab a piece of sandpaper and sand here where all the connections are and where the sticks are coming through. So I already trimmed this up. I'm just going to sand it to make sure that it is nice and smooth. And these as well, because you can see the burrs in these. I'm going to probably have to put a little bit of wood fill or something in there into the gap. Although that might be unnecessary now that I think about it, because there are decals and things like that that are going to get attached over top of these things. So it might not be that important. Now the other part here is I need this to be relatively smooth as well. And, I mean, it's not really going to be, because this is kind of rounded and the dowel is not. So I'm just going to go over this lightly, not really expecting great things, but I don't want a lot of obvious, bumps that would get in the way of the next phase. And speaking of which, the next phase is these things need to go on. So this one's going to go on the bottom. It's going to look like this. And this one's going to go on the top, and it's got a groove in it, so it can, the wood can, ooh, squeaky, sorry. It can fit around like that. The question is, where am I going to glue? And apparently, well, the instructions tell us, it's kind of hard to see, but we want to make sure there's a lot of glue here. Apparently, that's going to be a major holding point. And then we're just going to trace the entire outline and everything in the middle. So there's going to be a lot of glue on this. All right, well, we can do that. This is almost one where you think, do I really want to use the wood glue, or do I want to just put a couple strategic spots of crazy glue? And I don't really want a crazy glue. That should be kind of a last resort under most circumstances, especially because this is very decorative, right? It is not structural in any way at all. And there's so many places for this to attach. I don't even know where I would begin to put the crazy glue. All right, so I'm going to spread this thin. I'm probably going to have to come back to this and put a little bit more glue in this cross section. In fact, I might have to put more glue in a couple places. Switch the dowel over here. This stuff is pretty narrow, and my dowel has a big old blob of glue on one end of it from repeated use. Probably need a little bit more here. So I'm starting to run a little low on glue as well. Oops, looking at getting a new bottle in the offing. All right, that's pretty good. Now, let's attach this thing here. Now, you need to make sure that it gets down all the way around the, I don't know what you would call this piece of wood right here. So it's got to get down and flush. I mean, it's got to get flush everywhere, but this is probably the most important part, because if this isn't flush, if it isn't down the whole way, you're never going to get it attached properly anywhere else. Now, I'm going to try to just put steady pressure, pushing up with my thumbs here and pushing down with my fingers to get this to hold. This is going to take a while to set up properly. And the other thing that needs to get done, I'm not going to, this is probably going to be where we're going to wrap things up for now. I'm not going to demonstrate gluing the other part on either, but they both need to be trimmed because if you can see, just by me flipping this over, the cardstock is wider than the wood, which is fine. I mean, that's a good thing. It's better too big than too small. But we're going to trim that up after the glue dries. But I think I'm just going to do it, I don't know. It'd be easier, I think, to trim this one and then put the next bit on because I should be able to see it better. I guess it wouldn't really hurt to glue both and then trim. Yeah, maybe that's what we'll do. All right. It's been a little bit of time now. I'm going to start releasing things here and see how well the paper is stuck. I have a kind of a weird bump right here. And it looks like that's because the joint that I made there was not particularly centered and it wasn't very flush. That's unfortunate. But it's not that big a deal. The rest of things, they look pretty well stuck on there. So yeah, I guess we might as well do the backside here too as well. Same basic technique. Glue is going to go on the outside. Basically, it's going to go everywhere we can get it on the edge. This one might be a little more difficult because that that cutout section, actually having to force the paper down through that, it provided a little bit of, resistance isn't the right word, but let's say assistance for me to hold everything in place. So we won't have that on this side, so it might be harder. I don't know, we'll find out. Spreading the glue thin. This is definitely one of those cases where a dab will do you, as they say. You don't want to overdo the glue here because the more glue you have, the more you need to dry before everything is tacky and then everything sets. All right, there is a right direction and a wrong direction. This is the blunter end, this is the pointier end, so I'll make sure that that gets on in the right direction. And I have a little bit of glue in my hands. I do not want to get glue on the paper because the paper is kind of merciless for getting glue balls and things like that. So every time I feel a little bit of glue get on my hand for whatever reason, I'm kind of like immediately getting rid of it. All right, now this one's going to be harder. The back looks pretty easy to deal with. It's not quite centered, but so this doesn't look bad. But you can see the glue in the front here is gonna, or the paper on the front here is going to have to curl down in order to be held to cover properly. So I got my fingers on the side pushing down. I think just how to do pretty well. The back shouldn't be a problem, but I have bumped things in the process. So yeah, let's make sure my front is lined up as well. It's actually too far. So let's bring it back a little bit. And all right, that looks pretty good. Yeah, so this is the watching glue dry part of the video. That's fun. Again, we really, really want to make sure that this is set properly because if it is tacky and I'm like, oh, that's great, and then it decides, well, I mean, I was tacky, but I wasn't dry, and starts pulling away, then I'm going to end up with an unfortunate outcome here. Because once the glue sets, I mean, there are ways, you can try to reattach it, make it fit closer, but that's going to be a royal pain. Right now, the paper is still, the glue being wet has allowed the paper to bend a little bit more, so this is the time that I want to get everything right. I don't want to have to come back to this and tack things down later, because first of all, it's going to be hard. Second of all, it's not going to look as nice. So anyway, just kind of a preview. When this is done, I need to trim. I mean, I guess I might as well do all these things in a whole other video because there are actually a few other steps with the pod, and then we can start on something else. I need to do the other one too. Obviously, that's going to happen off camera. But I think this is pretty much a good place to sign off for right now. I'm going to hold this for like another 5 minutes, I think. You really do not need to watch that. All right, so thanks for watching. We will come back to this at another date. See you later.